Right, this is going to be another episode of Snake and Banter. Our guest for this one is RossR, who you might have seen I did an interview with on my channel, and he is the strategy and analysis lead at Fnatic, which sounds like a nebulous, vague term, but basically, as we discussed in the interview, think of it as something akin to, like, I don't know, a technical director in football, if you know what that does, where you're also involved with things like scouting the players, but also potentially maybe hiring the staff and putting together the general vision of the team. And the point is, when we did our interview, he's got quite a lot of interest and insight into, like, scouting players and the metrics, etc. For example, he was working at Endpoint when a lot of names came through that team that you may have heard of, Boros, Nerds, other people like that were quite famous the last few years and have been among the top teams. So we're going to get into it on this episode. So Ross, let's start out. What is your initial point you're bringing to the show?
I think the no bias for me, but I think the EU RMRs were fantastic in terms of like entertainment.
Sure.
The contenders, like genuine contenders for the major, have all qualified. I think the team that missed out that was probably most notable was Eternal Fire. But other than that, you got all the guys who you think can really win the major are there, but also you had like some amazing storylines and the Passion UA guys qualifying and like GamerLegion rebuilding the roster after it being eviscerated. RMRs are by far my favorite event in esports. I've gotten to go to a lot of them.
R.I.P. for that, then, okay.
Yeah, but I think that there are so few moments in esports that are so. It's the pressure on the players is so different. It's kind of like you even see it in like the PGA Tour or whatever, where players are on the verge of retaining their card for the next year. That kind of pressure is so different to the pressure that you get of being in a final. Like, yeah, like the pressure of greatness is still like huge if you're going to qualify for or win an event or not. But the pressure of expectation is so much more severe. And this, like, there's no other esports event where I see so many players, staff, everyone in tears, or like there's like a 1,000-pound elephant lifted off their chest after they qualify from the relief. So it's I love the RMR. I think it's in terms of entertainment and a product, it's just fantastic. And I'm going to miss it for sure.
Okay, soliloquy for the RMR there, Maui. What do you think?
I'll just stick with the good stuff on this one for now for these RMRs. I have to agree. I think that it's bittersweet in a way that they're going away. But for the positives for the RMRs, I would just say that it was the highest pressure of any tournament. I've already said in the past that it's the most important tournament of the year, and that the teams that are especially on the cusp, more like the tier 1.5, tier 2 teams, where so much of their season hinges on this. It's not that the tier 1 teams, their season doesn't hinge on it also. Like, the season is just seen as an objective failure if you don't actually qualify. But it's not, in a weird way, it's not as life-changing for the tier 1 teams who already have more stable backing. They're already going to get paid a lot of money. It's but for the teams that are more like, I guess like an Eternal Fire who didn't qualify this time, like, it kind of just ruins everything. It puts it leaves a bitter taste in their mouth for going into the winter break. It's just that we've seen so many great stories emerge from it. Teams that we otherwise would never have cared about, players we would have never cared about. I think of most primarily Monty and Apex, for example, the runs that they went on to then have players that ended up ascending, or actually GamerLegion on top of that, of course, too. Just kind of like those teams that were able to punch up into it. The thing is that, I mean, okay, we'll get to the negative stuff later, I guess, on RMRs. But in general, I think it's an incredibly entertaining product. I think that's actually just flat out undeniable. I feel like the just the like there is an energy of it. There's an energy of the RMRs that it feels almost like it's like getting your big break, and that to me is something that it captures a different sort of spirit than having a deep run at a major itself. Like Into the Breach, getting to the top 8 of the major probably didn't really change many of those guys' lives, but definitely getting to the major in the first place probably had a greater impact on the organization and even some of the players that are in it. So yeah, and the breaking point there is really the RMR and not the major. So it's kind of unfortunate that it's going away just just because of narratives. I think it's really it was kind of a beautiful moment to see some of these teams just like Passion UA, for example, the way that they popped off when they qualified. That's like it's unlike anything else, really.
Yeah, that is the thing. We have a tournament circuit in the calendar where we have so many events that are in some ways benign because it's teams, they go to them, they get knocked out, they play a similar tournament in the next week. This is just so different because you just don't see that. At Fnatic as well, we're at event, we go to an event and we're at the LAN, we fail, and that's bad and whatever, but we have another event the following week and we need to attend that, and the focus shifts that, and the scar tissue disappears very quickly. But the RMRs last with you, and though, like, for a lot of people I speak with about the changes that are coming with the RMR, they like it because it's like, well, yes, you're gonna, in the future, it's easier in theory to qualify, and there's less of these moments. But really, these moments, for better or worse, they're why we're involved in sport and why we like it. And if you try to remove all the moments that are disastrous and you feel awful, well then, because even those moments, when 10 years from now, when the players are retired or whatever, they would kill to go back to those moments just to experience that and live the disaster again, because that's why we're involved in sport, is because it should be really punitive. It should be high tariff. You should feel awful when it's bad because that's what makes it feel good, or the relief when you get through to the next stage. And it shouldn't also be so binary that it's like qualification for the major, fantastic, don't, disaster. But that's what it is in times in sport. And if you try to remove all that and you try to make it you kind of agnostic, it's just you take away the fun of it, and you take away those miserable flights home, and that's why we're involved in sports.
The only problem is I'm actually against most aspects of the RMRs. So since this is technically the good point, I will sort of like, fucking follow suit, and I'll try to find the good within the RMRs, right? Because actually, generally, I'm one of the people who is quite boring. Like, I actually do just want to see the top 16 teams at all the tournaments. If you can't get in the top 16, I won't cry myself to sleep. I'll just go, oh, well, guess I'll just watch the top 16 teams play to this sick CS tournament for $1 million. I hope I won't miss out on too much of that enrichment of all those great stories and fucking the spirit and the emotion and, the drama and the human interest. I won't need any of that. But here's the way I'll meet you in the middle. I will say, I don't dislike those aspects. Like, those aspects are quite cool. Like, I know what you mean. That does sort of show, it's why it's funny enough they're called Passion UA. It shows the people who are sort of living and breathing the game right now, and for them it's not yet just a job, and it's certainly not something hackneyed or like, they're over it, and they're like, put it this way, they're not the players where you hear like 2 years into their career in a tier 1 team, they're just like, I don't really even care about winning the tournament. Look all this money I'm making, lol. Lol, like, I'm in the top 10 team, who cares? Like, they're not like that. These are the people who actually do live and die whether they make it off a result like this. You think of past events where SAW had the one where they did it, GamerLegion themselves have made it over the last few years. Like, this has been a massive result for these teams when they qualify. So what I'll say is this, I do think that has a place in the scene. It's just what I would do is something more akin to how they do it in like TI in Dota. I would just have more sort of guaranteed spots at the major that you make from essentially just being in the world ranking. Like, if you make it, look, I wouldn't really make it top 16, that's probably too many. Maybe it's like top 8 or top 12, you all get the spot. And then you have, say, like, I don't know, 17 to, you pick it, 24, 36. They do the equivalent of an RMR for the last however many spots, 4 spots, 8 spots, however many you've got for your major. You can do the last few there in that sense. I'll even add in, here's how I'd actually sell you all on it to make you believe, even though I'm actually taking away your rando little bullshit Swiss cheese format nonsense shit where it's like, oh, I'm fucking enjoying all the shit. Oh, we had a great RMR. We prepared great. It's all about what we did. The belief in the team for 3. No, you just drew the most ridiculous Swiss straw of all time. You like backed into like, I've got Shashi eSport. It's like fucking CS. Yeah, basically nowadays, this is how bad CS has gotten. Nowadays, you want to draw Danish people. You just win the fucking game nowadays. Fnatic withstanding, we'll give you that one. But this is the thing I can't handle. It's like, even though I don't mind all that, I do think it goes too far though. And the problem I have is, I'd prefer that. Here's how I'll sell it to the people that, like, it's going to be good even for you if you like the upsets. Technically, your upset will be worth more if there are less potential scenarios where there is an upset. And then more importantly, actually, if you are Passion UA, it'll be even more exciting to qualify to the major, knowing that there's loads of top teams in it. Whereas actually, if you have a really rando, it can happen every now and then, RMR. It actually didn't happen, by the way, largely this time. Like, I actually think the teams that didn't get through were the teams where it was like, you know, Astralis didn't send device and shit like that. Like, actually, there wasn't really any big dogs that were like punished too harshly. In fact, as I said, fuckers like VP we can get to later, they did just walk on fucking water with their draw. Like, they never had to play anyone good. So what I would say is I do think sometimes I wouldn't want, like, put it this way, the Blast Paris Major, as much as it would have been, like, cool for GamerLegion to win it, they would also have won it beating, like, Monty as their, like, quarterfinal opponent and then no one good before that. And they would have won the tournament. And everyone would have gone, look, I guess you did beat Heroic and Vitality, but that's it. Like, you didn't play anyone else good. Like, I think you should have to also play good people. Let's combine both. Let's have it be really good and having a little bit of human interest element. Because, yeah, I will give you that. It was pretty cool. I also did think as well, like, that's one thing we've talked about the last few years. Maybe we could just spin this off a little bit as like a side topic. Is I think the thing that's changed in the last few years, Maui, if you think about when you started watching CS to what CS is now, it's especially actually, if you notice, it's actually after the sort of COVID online period. I don't know if people cherish the game more, but the actual different part now is there was always rookies like, you know, nervous or like ready and fucking, you know, locked in, like lose yourself moment to get to the major. But I think what's different now is how many veterans are shitting themselves at these tournaments. There's also like a dual aspect. It's almost like the people, it's the equivalent of like being relegated from the Premier League. Like you're at the other end of your career and you're sort of like, shit, how many more of these can I make it to? And I think that's what you see now, bros. Now you see loads of veterans who are sort of like, you know, back in the day, you'd see their name on the roster list and you go, oh, their team's guaranteed to get through. Nowadays, mate, those guarantees are fucking gone. I think there's a lot of people sort of hanging on by the seat of their pants, as it were.
I think when you, that's the thing, because we so rarely get to see those matchups between the kind of, and it's the underdog story. It's where
for sure.
There's no expectation. They can just freely play knowing that it doesn't matter. And once they get a small lead, and that is the thing, it's like you think that you're going to sign these staple stalwart players that are just a lock for qualifying for the, you know, for the major. And that's not the case because and that's the whole idea. It's like you set these people up, great contracts, you know, and it's like, well, you're our path to the major. That level of pressure is massive, and they won't experience it at any other event in the same manner because the revenues associated with it aren't as binary. It's not a one-off event where you're going to play best of ones at M12, go 0-2, and then have to try and, you know, work your way back. Like in the RMR B, I think it was you got the best teams made it through in the end, but it was it was nightmare fuel for some of the organizations. And even in the case, it's like you go once you go 0-2, or one of the team, once there's an upset, it just kind of completely throws the cat amongst the pigeons, and it means that NIP have to play Spirit to try and qualify for the major, which is like, and that's it. Yeah, I think I take issue with the format as well. I don't think it's the way it is, but I think that I just don't want to see. And the big thing for me in Counter-Strike is that we're just not amazing at storytelling and creating these like really, you know, getting to know the players and getting to see the tears, the horrible moments, because we're going from back-to-back events, everyone is exhausted all the time. It's just hard to build these moments, but you get them at the RMR because it's just so visceral and so clear. It's like in that environment where that you don't have the fans and you just have all the teams, amount of teams I've sat with at RMRs where the staff, myself included, I've been many times I've failed to qualify, but you're sat there. It's such a different level of pressure when you're sat with those people because the whole business is behind the team. You're so invested in the success at this one-off event, and it comes down to an overtime and a best of three. It's just a different level of pressure. It's so much fun in ways where other esports events kind of you're just rolling through one after the other. It's like, but yeah, it's just I don't think it should be so binary, and and there's just so much volatility that's tied to the RMRs now, and in that sense, I'm glad to see the back of them. But we need some sort of alternative that isn't just a calendar that's absolutely packed out for the entire year, with back-to-back events, and we lose these moments.
Okay, right, Maui, what is your good point?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you let me know that we got Ross as the guest, I figured we should just make sure we talk about Fnatic and especially blameF, because blameF was just unbelievable in the RMRs, and I'm I think we've talked about before. I mean, you and I rate blameF pretty highly compared to how the community sentiment has sort of just created a really bad image of who blameF is as a person. Yes, blameF is a player that is more prone to getting eco frags. Yes, he's more prone to saving in a situation than maybe some other riflers. But I don't actually I like I think it was Pimp at IEM Rio who said that the best Danish player in the world is Tessus, or I mean, the best Danish player. You don't have to add the in the world part, I suppose, but it's the best Danish player is Tessus. I I can't see how it's not blameF actually. I actually cannot see how it's not blameF. Seeing how blameF played at the RMR and like no flame to really the rest of Fnatic, but what he did to lift them up in map 3 against Eklot, like it should have never if there were I'll just put it like this. If all of the players on Fnatic were, say, 90% as good as Fnatic, instead of having the wavering form that they tend to have throughout these kinds of events, Fnatic is like a top 18 team in the world, maybe top 15 team in the world. Like he was so far and away the best player that and also on top of that, in the final map of a BO3, all the pressure's on the line. He got 12 opening duel wins, 0 losses. That is crazy. And I was kind of keeping track during the actual match, and I think 8 of them were regulation, and then 4 of them were overtime, if I'm not mistaken. So it was like 4 of his 12, I mean, were in the highest pressure moment of him and basically his career at that point. He's only been to one major before, and for him to qualify now with this team, it was just simply absurd. He ends up the entire event as the third highest rated person at the RMR. And if you look at the people he's next to, it's like Zywoo, Torzi, Bit, Heavy God's there too, Yimpat. Like they're mostly teams that got through a little bit cleaner, with the exception of Heavy God. And so for him to put up those kinds of numbers, and also just not be like the baitF moniker has just ran way too far, because the way he played in this game, the amount of times he's just pressuring door early on in the round, the amount of fights he's taking on early, like looking for fights, like he knows he wants to get an opening kill for his team. It's not just like it's not baiting in the same way that so many people in the community imagine him to be. Like the blameF that is actually playing the game versus the baitF that Twitch chatters and Redditors imagine are it's such a different actual product. So I'm personally really glad to see him make it. And I mean, I kind of was going to expand this a little bit to Fnatic in general as a team, but I think the big highlight of your team is blameF, and I'd say that the fact that you guys were able to just swoop him up at the time you did, when his stock was probably at an all-time low, and for him to prove in front of everybody that he was able to qualify with a Fnatic that, I mean, come on, if you look at the rosters 1-to-1, the Astralis lineup, even without Device, versus the Fnatic lineup with blameF, I would say that the surrounding pieces to that Astralis lineup are better than what Fnatic has, and yet you guys still made it. So the star power obviously had a huge factor there. And again, I mean, you could just take the whole point as just being blameF is my good point, period.
Yeah, like Ben is one of the most impressive people I've ever met in esports. I think he's more of the older ilk of sports people, and what my generation probably people liked from athletes, and being very receptive of or just driving standards and how players drive those standards. And that is, I find in some way at times alien in esports, that it's kind of the expectation is that a lot of it is coming from the coaching staff, the team director, the player management, and it isn't so much players holding one another accountable. I think he's like such a consummate professional, the way he conducts himself, the way he does his own preparation.
He's one of the people who always has his hours up, right?
Yeah, like everything. Like it's regimented, it's routine, it's the faces, it's the match prep, it's the gym, it's the diet, it's the input in post game, pre game. There are things that he did at the RMR in terms of the preparation for us on certain maps that were like completely like game changing for us. So you can see how he's always kind of ended up in that in-game leadership role, because historically in-game leaders were always just the person who put in the most effort outside of the game and brought a lot of it. That is shifting over time, but we were. It's just one of those things. It just happens in sports, like players that are undervalued by the market because of perception. I think that there's a few of them in Counter-Strike where people underrate the value that they actually offer. And Ben was just in that moment in his career where its kind of complexity was, a very high, expensive team to put together, and probably one trophy in that period. And then his time at Astralis was tumultuous, to say the least. So it's like his stock was low, and also his role wasn't really sought after, I think, at the time from other teams. It was capable people. It's also uber desirable role to have in most teams, but a lot of the time that person doesn't give as much input in terms of the whole picture of Counter-Strike. They're kind of just someone in the periphery, but his style of play, as to Maui's point, he's taken way more responsibility in winning us key rounds, going and getting entries. But he also has a lot of space and a lot of trust from the other players, and that's the huge part of it. There has to be a willingness. If he comes with ideas that people are accepting, and there's no pushback at all. So if he comes and wants to do something and has an idea, that someone will, more Freddie or Tim or Alex, Body or Maddie, those guys, they will just help create the space for him to do those things. So they see his value. So we're very lucky to have him, and I was so relieved for him that we qualified, but also so relieved for the other players. We built up so much scar tissue within just in that group of players, bar Knock, who's qualified, for multiple majors in a row, and Freddie in Crims, to him all this stuff is just like water off duck's back. He's ice cold throughout these games. But for the other guys, it's Maddie was at Bucharest with us and failed to qualify for the major, and it was an awful moment. And so was Body, and Body hadn't been to a major in forever. So for him, it was like trying to get back to the peak. And then Blame has been to one major prior to this ever, which is crazy considering how sick of a player he is.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just so happy for those guys. And it's tough because you set like the whole goal is like, we need to qualify for the majors. Like everything is building towards this one event, and then you have some things fell in line for us in terms of best of, like we played Rebels and we played who's the other team we played the best one, Beppu, who in fairness that was a decent result, beating them at Nuke. But then we played Navi. We played teams that we're expected to lose to. We played teams we were expected to beat. We beat them, and we didn't have to play the decider game. And that was a huge thing. So things fell our way as well. But yeah, it was the relief. I can't like in the room, the relief when we were together. So I think Ben has been transformative for us, but it's also a case of that he's setting standards, and he has a standard that he wants to have at a team, and like everyone needs to contribute to that and rise to that. And it's so nice to have players that do that stuff, that come in, and that I can see how that might not be palatable for other players, might not be palatable in certain team environments, or if you're coming in as an outsider and then trying to do that where you don't have full buy-in or the respect of the players, like that can be super tough. But here he has it in abundance, and the guys love playing with him. So yeah.
I appreciate the way he made Crims there sound like fucking Dr. Manhattan from the comic book Watchmen, where it's like, it's 2013, I am with LGB, I'm early in my career, now I am playing NIP. It's 2015, I am winning in the Fnatic era, Flusher may have cheated, I don't care anyway, lol. It's 2018, now me and Brawl on here. Like, he's just fucking experiencing all of time through just like, he made it sound like he was some like higher life form. Like, these years are but days to blameF in like some fucking elf character. I love it. In many ways, though, he does live up to that. That is like the fucking guy I see him as. He is just super chill, isn't he? So, okay. Go on.
No, he's still like making jokes and those.
Oh, right. Okay, fair enough.
The relief that gives, like he eases the.
Oh, even he had like tension from that, right?
Oh, for sure, man.
Right,
yeah, for sure. But he's gotten that stage in his career where he wants it more for the other players than he does for himself, kind of thing. So it's
okay.
But for Freddie, it's like you always want him to be more vocal and more of a leadership role, but it's taken time, but he's gotten to that where it's with younger players. He can see and even for Body and Blame, it's like those moments trying to qualify that he becomes more and more vocal in those games where in the past he was like kind of just a silent person who goes about his work really effectively, never misses utility, just really reliable. Now he knows that he needs to contribute in a more meaningful way.
Yes, as the old joke on this show goes, it was never actually true that Broland didn't want to speak English. He just didn't want to speak to a specific English person. Same with Crims. So you know what? Problem solved now. He can speak English as long as it's not to a dickhead all day long, it turns out. Works brilliant, actually, as long as you enjoy the language. So, okay, back on blameF, though. Let's get back to the Glaze F fucking session. So I will say, first of all, obviously this is one of those aforementioned stories from Ross's good point, isn't it? Because if you think about it, where was blameF at the previous RMR? The contrast is ridiculous, isn't it? Like, you basically have a night and day example. Before he was on a so-called super team, by the way, it was, people are going to do that thing forever where they go, was it a super team? Super teams are a terminology based on when you form the squad. How did people perceive the players? It's not about whether it actually succeeded or a promise that it will. So that was on paper, because it was like all those HLTV top 20 players all in one team. That was a super team, and also it cost millions of dollars, etc. And lastly, I mean, obviously people highlighted that this tournament where Astralis didn't make it, but the difference was previous RMRs, Astralis did always send rosters that on paper should at least have had like a good chance to make it and hadn't. So it was very conspicuous they hadn't made it. So if you think about where he was at, essentially when he got kicked out of that team, the stock couldn't be any lower. Like, I mean, I genuinely want people to think about this. What if Fnatic wasn't the team that saw like the value in this guy and picked him up? Where the fuck would he be playing right now? Would he be like Huxley? Would he just be sat doing nothing? Because I think, by the way, he doesn't seem like the sort of guy who'd like to do that, just sit on the sidelines and get forgotten about. If he played, he'd have to be on an even worse team. So I don't even know the fuck what team he would be on right now. And I think that is an absolute travesty, because not only as you've seen here, where he was like essentially arguably the best player in the fucking RMR, especially, by the way, had the most on his shoulders, like Maui's saying. Like, the difference is people like Zimu who have vitality. blameF had players where not all of them did that great all times. It was more up and down for the rest of the squad. So I thought he was awesome at this tournament. I think in general, as soon as he arrived at Fnatic, he just looked better and better and better every single month I've seen him play, even as the lineup's been sort of tweaked. And then also, I put this out there before, one of the reasons I thought it was so dirty the way that Fnatic did him, Astralis, is when he was kicked out, the implication people had was, well, who needs blameF anyway? We have Stown. It's like, I'm going to go the other way. It's the other way around, dickheads. Like, blameF is better than Stown. What are we even talking about right now? You're just saying that, guys, because you remember when Heroic was really good, he was like the player that got to look the best in the team. I'm just going to put this out there. You know, when people even say blameF was a top 20 player all those years. Yeah, by the way, if you ever go and look where he is on the top 20, the only reason he isn't in the top 10, by the way, is because his teams usually work good enough. And by the way, he's nearly always the reason that he is even in the top 20, if you know what I mean. Like, he has to take like Astralis lineups that are just like, all right, you know, it's like you've built like 3/5 of a good team, and then the other two, you know, no one knows yet, / they never make it. And then he has to like hard carry like this, get them into like a playoffs of a tournament. Then he can just sneak into the top 20 because he has enough like EVPs or whatever the fuck HLTV go on. Like, what I'm saying here is, guys, like, if you reverse their careers and he's on some fucking sick functional team like Heroic, where they build the whole team around him and he just gets to do like secondary, I imagine he'd have a fucking bunch more top 10 placings. Like, he's actually a fabulous player. Like, I agree with you, Maui. You could easily make the case he's the best Danish player, or was in any of these years. Like, even if it was someone else, he's like number 2 or number 3. Like, because the thing I want to emphasize with this guy is, my issue always was, is he IGL material? Because like, as Ross had that discussion, obviously clearly he was willing to do that role many, many times over, but he never struck me as the person who does it out of like pure love of like tactical thinking, or, you know, like that sort of thing, which I think is, you have to have a bit of that if you want to sustain yourself as an IGL, in my opinion, because it's kind of like, you'll drive yourself crazy otherwise. So to me, I always just wanted him as a star player like he is now. He just looks fucking mega. I always say this, the thing with him for me is, normally when you compliment the flaw of someone's game, what you mean is, I'm going to essentially give you a backhanded compliment. You're not going to get like praise for being like a super duper player, but I'm going to say you're not bad. He actually has both. The ceiling's really high on his game. He can fucking have crazy pop-offs. So he just, like we're talking about, he's like fucking one of the absolute best riflers. Pretty when you talk about more skilled riflers, it's like Duncan. This guy'd be in the fucking conversation as well. He's got fucking bonkers abilities in duels. This guy'd be right up there with the Sphinxes of the world. And then also, he does have a ridiculous consistency to the floor of his game too. Like, one thing I don't get is, when people essentially are telling this guy and me, we're wrong about Counter-Strike, he can't play this way. The famous line they always say is, they go, he might get frags, but he doesn't play winning Counter-Strike. It's like, that's such a fucking weak imagination for how the game works. Because to me, one, when you're as good as he is a master of how he plays CS. Like, he clearly knows exactly how to operate within that, because I find him to be a very consistent player. And then secondly, there is no such thing, if we're talking about someone who was really skilled and good at the game, that they just can't play CS. That means you haven't got them in the right team. Like, if you think about it, I'll give you two obvious examples, and the best thing is they were even awesome together. How about if we go back in a time machine and we pop out in like 2021 and we look at the players Jame and Yekindar? They're so extreme and so extremely the opposite. You would think none of them could ever work. You'd think if you put Yekindar on a team, he would just chain feet. I mean, he does now. He's obviously the joke he can write in, but he didn't used to back then. He was actually really good for like 2 years. And then you would think if you put Jame in a team, he'd just save every time and then lose the game. Oh, wait, he does that as well. But you get the joke. It used to work back in the day for 2 years. So whatever happened in those 2 years, it did work. The point is, if you balance the right players around someone like this, obviously it would work. And the reason why it's always driven me crazy, I agree with you, Ross, is actually one of the least recruited for types of players, because normally it's just your star rifler anyway, and so someone's already in a team and has this role. Because I think if you look, there are 1 million young riflers who want to play aggressive roles. There aren't actually many people who are good at the blameF style. There's another thing. People don't talk about that part, Ross. Maybe I could throw that back to you briefly. As someone who's building teams, I feel like, look, if you're in certain scenes where you don't have the aggressive player yet, it's a nightmare. Your team's going to look shit. But I think also vice versa. I think some people who just do that thing where it's like, oh, in our team, oh, I'll be the lurker. It's like, and they're not even like suited to be a fucking lurker, mate. Some of those people just do nothing in games. Like, that's the role where you can just be invisible in the whole game, and you didn't like throw the game, but you didn't give us any impact. Like, it's actually a more subtle role what people like blameF do than people realize, right?
I think you can get away with, and there's loads of examples, you can get away with having like an average team if you have like an outrageously good, or just a player who has a good tournament in that aggressive role. You can't really have one without the other. I think in order for, and blame is, in key moments aggressive, but you can't really have one without the other. You can't have players who are like ice cold and love to play in clutch situations without having space creators, because you just don't get to play those. You just end up keep saving. So in order for blame to succeed, you need Mattis, you need Alex, you need Freddie to run in and create space so that him and Nok can close out rounds and be really clutch in those moments. But I think you can. I think like there's loads of examples. Like if you look at like the Into the Breach team where Cypher had a really good period, or you look at GamerLegion with Flamus, those players, multi-kills, so impactful, so aggressive. Other players then can kind of meander through the game and win some clutches here and there. Those players are so important. I think the aggro riflers, and to have the absolute best ones, I think is the platform to be consistent. But you also want the people who are good in clutch situations to close out rounds. And in the example of blame as well, like you want people who, a lot of the time the riflers that are really aggressive and young, they aren't major contributors in terms of how the game should be played. Early on, later on in their careers, we had Roy, who was amazing. He would like aggressive, would dictate exactly where we were going, what we were doing. But a lot of the time you have young guys, even Mattis now, a lot of it is still a learning process for him. And you have players like Blame and Crims and Alex who are going to help him find success and tee him up. So you need both in reality, but I think you can qualify for majors with just one. But if you're going to win big tournaments, you need to have the combination of like a really aggro rifler, space creator, multi-kill, like good chance of multi-kills, and then a player like Blame who, once he has the picture painted for him of what's happening on the map, that he'll just be better than the other player in exploiting those kind of gaps.
Right, actually, for my good point, I'm going to queue up one which is going to easily be a topic I'm sure Ross can talk about because it's someone he knows, which is I'm going to actually talk about the point where I saw actually Emma, who's a former player of this guy, did point out that actually not just GamerLegion qualified to the major, but obviously Ash, the coach, who we've had as a guest on this show before, and I did my own interview with him about his like vision on the game and actually this lineup. He obviously, if people don't know, the 0 players in this lineup were in the Blast Paris lineup. Like even the Vault guy, that was Into the Breach he was in, guys. Like he had to literally come. If people don't know, if you go years and years and years back, he had people like him for fucking donkey's years, like years back, and that guy just came through with him. Then he made the squad that became the Blast Paris one, and they made it to Rio because famously they beat G2, if everyone remembers, when they knocked him out. It's just at the time no one remembered the GamerLegion side. They just remember A-Core beat G2, but you probably don't even remember what team it was on. Then, if you remember, it was after that was the one where they actually made it for real to the final of the major, but because he had his players immediately taken, like the key pieces in his squad, he was then doing the nightmare, like, reverse musical chairs where you just, like, never get the fucking chair and you're always downgrading a player. And every time you're doing that thing, which is the worst shit ever as a GM, where it's like, it's not that the player you're getting's bad. It's just, it's like, yeah, that'll do for now, I guess. Like, and then but you're doing that on like 3 names. And at the end, you're like, I've even got a roster I would pick. Like, what am I doing in the game at this point in time? I'm just fielding players. Like, essentially, my joke would be, because I'm going to contrast this with what he's doing now. My joke would be, he was on the nightmare championship manager save, where it's going downhill worse and worse and worse. And then even when you do a sick job in the shit foreign league, you don't even get like the offers from all the big teams. And you're like, what the fuck? I'm killing it in this game. Where are all the offers? Because as you might have seen in my interview with him, the Ash guy basically has had almost like the least amount of media attention I've ever seen for someone who, as we've just said, coached a bunch of rookies into majors and then in the fucking final of the last CSGO major ever. He even said after that result, no press even came and tried to interview him. He was just sat there like, hello. And it was like one of those memes of like, you know, like uncomfortable truths and like, you know, harsh reality where like people are just going to like the fucking, no, like, you know, like whatever comfortable truths and people just go to the other line. Like no one give this guy any attention. So what I want to just point out now is this is like the dream fucking championship manager save, because what he's done now is so fucking shrewd. Instead of do what he did in the Snacks era, where it's like, right, what I'm doing now is I used to have the up and comers, but I haven't got the next crop of them. Like I was too busy working with the players I had. So now what I have to do is I have to quickly pivot into like, you know, make people who are sort of like they used to be good or they could still be decent. And he was working with those slightly scuffed rosters. And now if you haven't seen the new GamerLegion, he has basically completely pivoted to like every single move he has taken is like almost putting his balls on the table and saying like, if I'm wrong, then I'm just wrong about CS. Because even his veterans, if you don't know, Volt, the player from Into the Breach, was just all right, but he wasn't some like mega player, but he is a veteran. Then you had ZTR, who actually at this point has to be considered something of a veteran. He's been out enough years, even though he used to be obviously a NIP fucking academy player, but he's been in IGL in some teams now. By the way, he's completely like transformed his career story. And then the 3 young guys are just really, if you've watched Tier 2 online for the last 6 months, they're just really shrewdly scouted players. And then the way they put together is just really smart. Like essentially he's just gone and taken all the other good Tier 2 teams and just picking out their best player, but in the roles that actually can all fit together in his squad. Like I actually think like that's why I say it's like a championship manager save, because it's like what you do is, you know, the famous angle where you either try to get the player who now is good but he wasn't at the time of the game and hope that they programmed him similar, and you get the cheat where he gets to come to your team, or you have to get like the player who's like in this case that Volta at ZTR, which is out in the wilderness. No one wanted these people. Like they would never be in a famous team at this point, and if this guy didn't gamble on them. So to me, it's not even the GamerLegion angle, it's actually the coach, because to me this is the coach's whole vision. This is actually what it's funny, Ross, because when I asked him sort of like, why aren't you in better teams, basically, he did sort of say it was because I've been in GamerLegion so long, they do give me like full control now though, whereas, you know, other teams, it might be like they decide the players, or I have like a limit on who I can get rid of and stuff. So he's gambled, but I tell you what, he's won on this one, mate. Like this might actually transform how people make teams. I think the GamerLegion one to me is, you can't look at any name and go, well, that's obvious, you know, he had X player. Like this is a fabulous qualification.
I think it's an amazing achievement. I think it's so tough to have your team like fully wiped out, you know, and then losing back-to-back in-game leaders, because normally that's kind of your partner in crime.
Sure, yeah.
When you're at one of these teams, like how that person is so pivotal for how you're going to play CS. I think it's an amazing achievement. But I think the Flamus one is just, I think that that was the key piece that they got a hold of, that he seems to be a big personality, even seeing him.
He seems to have a really spunky attitude, doesn't he? That's kind of cool. I like that interview, dude. That was dope. Yeah. If people don't know, basically, he was one of the sort of people who was sort of like, "Fuck it, we're going to qualify, lads." It didn't seem like he was intimidated, right? And
that makes it so much easier for the other players if you have someone who's
sure
going to be the lightning rod for all the noise and kind of. But genuinely, when I was out in Shanghai, I thought they looked so poor early on in the event. But it kind of grew into, once you go 0-2, it becomes so hard, and it's the hardest route imaginable. So it's just, it is super impressive. I think Ash deserves a ton of credit, because like I assume that they did quite well out of all the players that they sold. They sold them for the most part.
I've no doubt. Yes,
established organizations.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, it's you know, they would have had to buy out a number of those players that they did acquire in the end. So you have to back yourself, because you know I'm sure for the most part he was probably breaking the transfer record spend.
Sure, yeah.
Each player that they bought at GamerLegion at the time, so you have to back it. And there's only so many bullets you have in the chamber that you get to fire off and get it right. But yeah, whatever it is now, is it four consecutive majors qualified for? It's extremely impressive, and I think that's probably an argument that why has Ash not been given a bigger job in CS?
I mean, based on that, he himself, just as one human being, is better than the whole Astralis org, since he qualified for 4 and they failed 2. So there you go.
Yeah.
Which A is more important in esports, Ash or Astralis? I'm saying Ash right now. There you go. Sure. Obviously, logically, they should just sign him to Astralis. There you go.
But you see, we see so many kind of coaching staff in esports recycled over and over
again.
Yeah. And I do think it's tough. I think the hardest part in esports is actually hiring good coaching staff. Sure. It's actually quite easy to identify good players, but how do you identify? Like, how do you acknowledge that someone is clearly punching above their weight and making the group of players better than the sum? He's done it now multiple times back to back. So it's you have to take your hat off and give him credit. I think that he also has. I think there's another. I can't remember his name. Someone else he's working with as part of his background.
Yeah, there's some other guys as well. Yeah,
gives a lot of credit to as well. So I think it's kind of the two of them together. But so impressive.
And some other British guy. I think I forget the name though. Unfortunately, yeah. What do you think, Maui?
I'm looking at their page. There's a guy IMD.
There you go. That's it. I think that's
it. Yeah. So, I mean, the whole thing with GamerLegion is that they were not on anybody's radar to actually make this. I feel like looking just retroactively at the results, it actually feels like they were peaking at the right time. It's just that the events that people were actually following, they weren't doing anything at. The Blast Fall groups where they were basically debuting their new lineup just came in last place. They came in last place at the Blast Showdown also. But then you start to see that they're ramping up with these CCT events where they're coming in second place to teams like Bait, Sinners, Bet Boom, and then they actually beat Passion UA in one of the most recent CCT events before this event, before the RMR. And it's so, Blade always talks about wanting to peak at the right time for the important events, and it actually seems like Ash got his team on track to do just that. They peaked with it. It's like they got ZTR in, or they've got their last member of this team. I guess the scary thing for them though is that they got this Tossin guy pretty much right before the RMR. I mean, I guess it's 2 months, but I mean that's pretty short compared to maybe having him at the beginning. Like the July 5th signing of ZTR was kind of where I feel like the team was turning and they were trying to make something of it. And like ZTR is incredibly different than Snacks. Like I think ZTR as an in-game leader to me has always been good, like well thought out reactions and secondary plans in rounds. He is much less of a fragger. I don't actually necessarily even think that he's maybe is like on the fly.
But it's Maui. A lot of people forget this, but for real, when he was the one that briefly, before they replaced him with LNZ, was an IP player, we actually said like he was actually pretty decent back then, wasn't he? Like where you used to call like 2 maps or whatever the fuck it was. You could see back then he had some potential, right?
I mean, he single-handedly made their overpass worth watching. Like before, they were one of the worst T-side teams in Tier 1 CS in, I think, 2021. And then when ZTR actually stood in for them and started calling on those maps, they actually started, winning T-side halves on overpass against some of the best teams in the world. And then they continued to be good after he'd left for a while, but it kind of felt like it was just the remnants of whatever he brought to the team. And obviously, like, overpass is one of the maps back in the day that it's just the most layered tactically beyond, like, next to nuke, basically. Like, you have to have all these ideas for how you want to start rounds and play to punish, and even taking space is just such an arduous process. I would say this, like, to talk about Ash, I think it's one of those, like, we've now seen it with enough variety in lineups that it's not it's just not a coincidence anymore. That's like the most obvious part of all of this. I will say we're throwing him one extra bone here because they technically didn't qualify to the last one.
Oh, that's true. Yes, the 9 Pandas one. Yes, that's true.
Yeah, 9 Pandas had to drop out due to visa issues, but they were the next team in line. So in a stacked European RMR, sometimes that, I mean, still impressive
exactly.
in a way.
I
so
agree.
I'll give him a little bit there, but I think that also just deciding to make the move to drop Andu with that little time left is such a risky move. Sometimes you just bite the bullet and you just do it, and then you and then you just stick with him. But instead you actually went for this toss move, who to me was solid at this one. Like Flamus was clearly the show stealer, the showstopper of this lineup during their RMR. There was like one more point I had about Ash where it's just like it's just that we've seen now enough times where it's been successful. There was something else I was going to make, but some kind of point. But either way, no, he's been super impressive overall. There's no doubt about it.
By the way, also, even though this isn't relevant because he's actually pretty good now, I also like that Ash himself even thinks it's funny that the banter nickname people made for ZTR is because his name's ZTR. They were calling him Zero T Rounds, which is actually, if someone's an IGL, that is straight. Whoever came up with that, that's straight fire.
Terrible.
I like that type of banter.
So
That's fucking fire. I like shit like that. I like
funny.
rude shit like that. That's what I want. So yeah exactly. Right. Okay. What about? Right, it's time to do the bad point. So, Ross, what is your bad point?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a combination of, I think, going into next year. I think that the changes to the circuit, but mostly the removal of the Ormor and not having an alternative and just going to a purely invite basis 32 team, broadening the major as well, for better or worse. It's like there are, from a organizational perspective, I think it's better because you can argue that there'll be more consistency in it'll be easier to qualify for majors. The revenues will probably be less because there's going to be more teams, but you can probably be more consistent and you don't have to try and peak at the right time of the year. You just have to be good throughout the year. But it means that we're going to put all these moments that are so iconic in Counter-Strike. I always think of the last chance qualifier between FaZe and Cloud9.
Oh, sure.
And the C9 players crying. Like we're going to put all those moments, essentially, they're going to turn into, we're going to play an event before the last date of the Valve ranking, and we're going to be thinking, oh, okay, what do we need to do to get into this? What team, the team needs to do poorly at this event. We need to do well here. And that's going to be your kind of watershed moment. Great. And it takes away so much of what's fun of Counter-Strike for me and the event that I
you actually technically, look, you're not a professional comedian like me, so you did have the obvious setup, but you could have even done an amazing impromptu analogy where you were like, all those great moments will be lost, like tears in Rain, which obviously Rain was part of the reason why they lost that. See, listen, there's fucking levels you got to understand, Ross. Like, we're up here, there's literary references, allusions to 80s sci-fi cult classic. Anyway, back into that. Yeah, okay, I agree. That was a big moment. So your problem is, it's not just that though, it's also, you were saying about like the circuit, like what are your concerns about the circuit? Because the problem is a lot of this was obviously initially presented as it's good. It's like more money, more tournaments, more of everything, brilliant guys. So what's concerning you about the circuit changes?
I've just always felt with CS that we've had it's become so benign, and you're like mundane, agnostic to events, because like what makes El Clasico special in La Liga is because they play at most, 6 times a year, which never happens, but they would need to play like in the Copa del Rey, play in Champions League and play in the league. That's what makes it special. And if you have these matchups every week, over and over, constantly, it just becomes like, even for players, it's just a slog. You're grinding, you're attending events. You lose. It feels bad in the moment, but you get over it within a few hours because the penalty isn't that high. Like it's low tariff because you're going to another event next week and you get another bite of the cherry. So this, as an entertainment product, like from a sporting perspective, purely sports side of it, I don't mind it, because it's the more games you play in any sport, the lower volatility, lower variance, you've better chances of doing well, and you can actually look back in Counter-Strike at the end of the year and really say, okay, look at Passion UA, they're going to play whatever 400 maps this year. They can really look at some of their work and
that is absurd, isn't it? I know.
Or this is good, or this has been a bad year for us. It's very hard to say that in some of the other esports titles, because you play a handful of games and your season, you could have an off season for 6 months. But in Counter-Strike, so from a purist perspective like that, it's great, but it means that the storytelling element of it is getting lost, I think, and it's just a real churn exercise, and we just go event to event, and it's hard to. What makes the major special? A big part of it was the Ormor. What separates the major now, when it just becomes another invite event on the circuit with a trophy at the end with the same kind of matchups? It's like I like the open ecosystem. It's very much, we spoke about, it's very much a net positive for Fnatic as a whole, but I think that this jam-packed calendar of the same reoccurring
okay
events,
you're worried about fatigue from all the matchups, etc.
Yeah, it just feels like it's just a Groundhog Day at times with Counter-Strike.
Okay.
I'm less so for us at Fnatic, because
Okay.
we've been very much out of it, but I guarantee you, for the guys at like Vitality, at Navi, who are going to be at all the events, they're going to feel like it's just churn, and it's like, okay, we have Katowice now, we're off to Astana, we're off to wherever it may be. There are some nice tweaks and changes in like the bounty and like trying to do new things, but in terms of matchups and the major pressure moments and the fall off and what it means for the players, those moments of like, I guarantee you we won't see as the tears and the pressure that we see from RMRs. We won't see it next year, because those moments of kind of adulation and celebration will be behind closed doors when you find out that, okay, we're in the Valve ranking. Like even for us this year, like we were right at the threshold of qualifying or not qualifying for the RMR based on our ranking. We got in like, I think we were 17th or something. Like that's what the moment will be, but for qualifying for the major. Which I just think there's something missing there that we're like, from a fan perspective, but also from what I enjoy of sport, it's going to be lost, and we're not going to have these moments that are so memorable. Like I see there's going to be so many forgettable moments in CS if we make it just like this, just cookie cutter tournament after tournament after tournament all year out, and the players will look back and they won't be able to tell you the results of a lot of the tournaments that they were at.
I guess I would push back on this just a little bit. I feel like I just looked at Apex's match history or event history for 2024. He's going to by the end of the major, he'll have played 16 events this year, and he's playing roughly 1 out of 3 of his maps is against a top 5 opponent. And I feel like we're already in that. That's the pushback. I feel like we're already in that more or less. Okay. And that next year it will be similar though, because of the invite system and the way that if you're going to one of the tier 1 events, you kind of have to do it if you're a top 8 team, especially for some of the projects or the programs or incentives that some of the TOs are giving to orgs to continue to compete in their events. And I do they do spend so much time on the road as it stands already that I guess when I look at the pack calendar for next year, you simply aren't able to go to every event because some of the days overlap actually. So that's where the choices are going to be made. And I guess I hold out to the idea that because there's some overlap, some teams will actually decide to go to, I think there's like an overlap, for example, in like a Blast and a PGL event. I'll just say it as an example, that you'll have to decide, do you want to go to the Blast event or the PGL event, both of which are considered tier 1 events with similar prize pools, and then you just decide, probably based on the flight or your own schedule and where you want to take a little bit of a break. Do you want to like because they overlap with like only a couple days. So, or I think actually Dallas, for example, overlaps with another PGL event to IEM Dallas. So you can decide there. And I think that those little overlaps will actually allow for there to be a little bit more buildup again. Because actually, as it stands in this season, there's not really much overlap. The only overlap between any tournaments were Bet Boom Dasha events, along with, say, like an ESL Pro League. And that's when people like Spirit, sometimes Maus, I guess, Eternal Fire would play in those. But I just don't necessarily think that it's going to play out in a way that's too much different, because I think viewer fatigue is already very real in this space, and I just don't know if it can get worse. That's my main concern with this whole thing. It's like it's already in a pretty tough state right now. Like it's not the same as 2015 where people were playing, 1 tournament a month and it felt like, oh, we can look forward to this one, and oh, okay, we can write that one off. It really wasn't a big deal, and then we have another one in another month or whatever. So I just think that we're already in a super saturated calendar, and so that's my angle on this idea.
Yeah, I think that the only point I would make about it is that the saturation is I think it's terrible in terms of like entertainment for fans and building storylines and that kind of stuff. But I just think that it's all just going to be so low tariff in terms of pressure scenarios. There's going to be just so few moments that are so, and that's what I like. I think that's what makes sport entertaining, is those kind of moments that are so linear that it's good or awful. And we just don't have enough of those in CS. I think that you could see it. The only other comparable is kind of like qualification for the international in Dota, that it is perceived as absolute disaster for the players. I just think that I want a sporting environment where you feel awful at times and you feel great at times. And once we try to make it just, the schedule is already packed, but once we try to make it just more of the same over and over and over, just it's not just fan fatigue and viewer fatigue, but the players will just become, not agnostic to whether they win or lose. It's just that you just get so many bites of the cherry that the pressure doesn't build for them.
The problem I have is I also minorly push back, but I'll go on point and I'll find a bad angle for the circuit. I'll say my pushback is just this. I am the weirdo who does want it to be Groundhog's Day though, Ross. I do want it to be every single day I wake up like, and you put your little hand in mine. And then it's like, hey neighbour, hey, are you coming to watch it's IM Cologne 2022 final? You want to see Navi against FaZe? Like, oh boy, do I ever. Get straight down to the access, watch that every day of my life, would never ever get bored. Load up next day. Oh, time to get out. Oh my God, Simple versus fucking Rops and that. Get straight down there, watch that again. So, but that's why I've been here longer than everyone and will be here when you're all gone. I am immortal. You are all just fucking mere pawns who will just experience the light of a few days, and I am like Crims before me, and Crims are just eternally on the throne. Oh, time just experienced differently, dilation, everything, right? But about the actual circuit, like I do like that, but I acknowledge other people don't necessarily. Like I do get the feeling, unfortunately, for fans, they do get some level of fatigue, or at least like it does is definitely on the narrative angle. It makes them harder to understand narratives because, put it this way, I think League of Legends goes too far the other way. In League of Legends, internationally, you'll only get essentially like 2 or 3 storylines for a whole year. And so that will actually overly dominate the storyline. Like essentially on those ones, if you just do feel one of the big tournaments, like it can be presented as though you were like absolute trash, even though every other day of the year you were incredible, So in other games, sometimes you get too little to work with. So what I would say is this, I think actually, even though this is a self-serving point, I think people like me have also shown the way though that you can actually fix this problem in the current circuit, which is I actually think you need to have events which are almost set up like this isn't life or death like the World Championship. This is an event that might have the same teams, but this is a fun event, or this is one of those like, Beyond the Summit type, or Home Story Cup, chill vibes, or it's more like, we're doing this for like community angle. I think actually some of those events are good like pressure release valves in that particular way. It's actually why, even though I've made fun of pro players many times over the years, when they would bitch and moan about how many real tournaments they had to go to, but then there'd be a break and they'd do one of those tournaments where it's like 2v2 and the chairs go electric when you play, like what? Like, those like wacky things. But even though I'm being a dick to them, the reason they do those guys is that isn't the same pressure as playing at like fucking IEM Rio or something, is it? Like, they're just playing that going, oh, whatever, it's just a sponsored deliverable, it's basically a day off, I'm just dicking around. So I actually think events like that could help, actually, if we had like more of like a fun angle. But no, on the original thing though, I am the guy where you can never have too many mates. If I was the one, like back in the day, ran wrestling, I'm the fucker who has like those mad like title fights just on Raw, just on the fucking normal TV show. I'm not even saving it for WrestleMania, bro. I'm just having fuckers come in the ring and just, I pulled up the referee off, what the fuck? The fan's the champion now. Like, I'll be doing all crazy shit, devaluing the fuck out of the title. So yeah, there you go. We just have different perspectives on that. It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, I could jump into mine.
Yeah, sure. What is your bad point?
I feel like this is just objectively bad. I can't see a single way you could possibly spin this one. So my bad point is just the whole Valve not checking meticulously enough.
Here's what we need to do. You need to give a very, very simple primer for people. What is the actual issue here, Mo? Because a lot of people know there's some issue with rules, but I don't think a lot of people even understand what the issue is. So what is the premise here for this?
Yeah, I'll explain the whole thing, but it's just that so Valve didn't check Perfect World's rulebook close enough when they structured the RMRs, actually the European RMRs, which led to 4th place decider games being played, actually just a single one between FaZe and Cloud9 through European RMR A, which was supposed to determine which team is going to the opening stage or the elimination stage. For people that don't remember, the elimination stage is just the second stage of the major. Yes. But they realized, Valve did, that by European RMR B, that game shouldn't be played out, because as per Valve's rulebook, apparently seeding is not supposed to come as a result of whether you make it through the RMR as a 3-0, 3-1, or 3-2 team. It is simply supposed to just be all teams from Europe that qualify are then, regardless of 3-0, 3-1, 3-2, are then decided upon by Valve's ranking going into it, the Valve regional rankings. And so then they are placed into the elimination stage or the opening stage. So for example, and where this is really coming to bite Big Clan, is that Big qualified 3-0 through European RMR B. Despite that, they are not actually gifted that elimination stage spot. They have to play the opening stage out, and that should have just been apparent from the get-go. Like, this should have just been completely apparent from the get-go. I don't necessarily agree with the ruling in general, but I just think that the bad part here is it's just dumb that Cloud9 and FaZe even played a 4th place decider when it actually never mattered. Like, they actually played a match that never mattered. Retroactively, it never mattered because they decided to invoke the rule which Perfect World actually overlooked when they made their own rule book. And yeah, I mean, the main point about this, I could get into all these different aspects of this whole thing about like all the parts wrong with it. The main part is like for Valve to have a disconnect from Perfect World's rulebook just shows and Haka had the highest rated Reddit comment, or I mean, like, his tweet got onto the front page of Reddit because of this. He just said, like, at this point, Valve needs to have somebody hired to dedicate their time and basically make their job around esports, because for this to happen is just a huge oversight, and it obviously just leads to a meaningless game being played, expectations not being met by the teams when they're actually playing this tournament. And I just want to hear your guys' thoughts first, because I even have more points on this, but let's just hear. Yeah, what do you think?
Go on, Ross.
I think it's just kind of sad. I think that we're at the so far down the line of Counter-Strike and kind of the last or more, that we're kind of dealing with this kind of stuff. I think it's just it's disappointing. Even I was chatting to some of the players after they played that 4th place deciders, and it was a long day to begin with. It just feels it leaves a bad taste. But yeah, there's the last RMR. I don't think, as you say, I think it's objectively just bad. I think it's sporting integrity above most things. And to think that we're still at this stage in esports, sometimes it comes as no surprise. And like I love Valve in a lot of ways and what they've done for all of us. But I think I think that there is a lot to be said for taking a laissez-faire approach to these things and kind of hands off and not being visible. But there are times when you would just wish that they would just grab things and be proactive and manage it, because it's their event. And it feels at times like they take TI more seriously than they do kind of the Valve majors. But yeah, I think it was just a calamity of errors, and I don't know where there are to point fingers other than a Valve and kind of not dotting their I's and crossing their T's.
I've got a few angles on this one. So first things first, I will say that actually even my tweet on this topic doesn't actually make sense. This is actually a way more complicated one than I think I've ever seen, because here's the issue. I did a tweet where I said one of my principles of esports, which I actually think it should apply to every sort of competitive tournament. When you do a tournament, you'll never change a rule, because that means now 2 people got judged differently in a potential ruling situation. You have to keep like consistency of whatever the rule is. But to be fair, that's to be applied when you had a rule book and you just say, actually, this rule, I'm going to change it now to be better or different, and it's more like, don't change the current rules. The problem with this scenario, the actual real devil in the details, if people don't get it, is as Maui described. As far as we can tell, the real rule book did say to do what now they changed it to, and essentially it was just wrong the whole time before, and they just didn't check it. Now look, the latter point is incredibly easy to say and harder to do, but obvious, isn't it? Which is, check the fucking rule book before you do it. That part should go without saying, and I agree, that's actually basically like a level of professionalism I'm quite underwhelmed that a major tournament operator, whoever it might be, would fail at, because actually that's one of those due diligence things where, put it this way, the people in this call can confirm, I have probably done, by the way, like 10,000 fucking recordings in OBS, but I still do a test recording that I myself manually check every single time, 10,000 in, even though, by the way, I haven't lost one. I think I lost one episode, 10 into doing it out of the 10,000. Like the other 99, whatever, out of 9,000 something, actually the this test record didn't even fix anything. It just was a contingency plan where if I ever had have heard on the test record, oh shit, wait, one of their mics is wrong or something, I would have caught it and I would have fixed it. So first of all, just to be a professional, it's like a Counter-Strike player. You run through your protocols, you do things like you check the rule book, you check that this is the format. By the way, this is all before anyone's ever even pressed one keystroke in the game. You double check that. You get, as he says, you get all the T's crossed, all the fucking I's dotted, etc. You do all that. But then, and the reason why, by the way, there's actually a true irony to the fact that unfortunately it's Big that got fucked, because in the history of Counter-Strike, if you know anything about European Counter-Strike, actually Germans are notorious for themselves reading the rule book and finding any tiny little like discrepancy that they can like use in a qualifier or, you know, like a format time. Like they're the fuckers that, you know, if it says like then exactly like 14 minutes after the game is supposed to start, they will forfeit the opponent. They'll be the people that don't even message you till 15 minutes. You know what I mean? They know every fucking angle, but they got screwed on this one. So what I will say is this: I do think that's a way trickier scenario though, because technically whatever was in the original rule book is what should be enforced. So if you did it wrong once, you can't actually really. This is why I'm a bit torn. I don't think you can then just go, well, now that I know I did it wrong, I'll keep doing it wrong for the rest of the tournament to keep it consistent, because that's wrong from what it originally was. But which all brings me all the way to the last point, which is essentially the worst part about this fucking issue is, why does it exist? I'm getting really fucking sick and tired of the idiots that make tournament formats using fucking Swiss systems when it doesn't make sense. Like, think about, right, do you remember one of the first Swiss systems was that IEM New York, where they ran one with like 8 teams in a group, just 8 teams in a Swiss, and then they realised like, oh wait, shit, we've done it, so they just play like, again, even though at the time there was that rule that you couldn't play twice. So if remember like Optic and Fnatic or something played twice, it's something stupid, and then it was like, it didn't even make sense like how it works as a group, because essentially you should have had 16 teams and then had 8 get out, but they were doing 8 and then, you know, like 4 make the playoffs or something. So also, how many, I've pointed this out to Maui, I'm sick and tired of how many times I've seen the fucking America's RMR do this, where they go, let's use a Swiss, and you're like, oh cool, Swiss is awesome, you know, when you want to get a top 8 teams for playoffs. No, we're just trying to get like 5, so we're going to make it so that, you know, you can win the 2-2, and then you still lose the tournament. Like, what are we doing here? Like, one of the best things about the Swiss, if it's for an 18 playoff, is it's actually very obvious where you are at all times in the format, isn't it? Everyone knows like how many lives they've got and how many lives they can lose and how many wins get you into that spot. Instead, we're doing shit now where it's like you get to the point that normally in a Swiss system means you're in the playoffs, but it's like, but wait, we're not taking all 8 teams, so now you have to play a tiebreaker, Billy Bagoot. Like, this is, I think it's just terrible. I think you'd be better off, for real, either changing the number of teams so you can make it use a Swiss system, or just change the format. Like, this format just seems inappropriate. Why? By the way, any format, it's why I've campaigned for so many years to get rid of round robin. Any format with tiebreakers fucking sucks. Fucking sucks. What's brilliant about normal formats, where it's just like X teams get out, like GSL or a normal Swiss where you have the top 8, is, like I said, there's never any other factor than your wins or losses that get you through the game. So I'm not a fan of it in general. And also, I do agree with, if you're someone like Big, to tie it into the earlier point that Ross was making about how for some teams this is life and death, these qualifiers, it's everything for the whole year. Imagine thinking you have made it and then you're told, oh no, actually, you know, sort of go back a level, like, oh, this is fucking snakes and ladders, actually that ladder didn't go up there, you don't get to go there, sorry, you just go back a level, you think you just qualified and had all those hours of being ecstatic and telling all your mum and dad, like, oh, we're in this and they have to call back up, no, sorry, we aren't actually, Valve, right, like. And I agree also with Hawker. Come on, mate. They needed this 10 years ago, but I don't even want it to be anything crazy. I genuinely, I'm not even joking. I don't even need it to really be that there's a guy in the community that can like change things at Valve. I'm not even joking. I just want them to give us the reason. That's what I want. I've always said this. People know I'm a massive critic of Riot Games. But I'll tell you what, Riot's actually not that terrible at sometimes giving you some of their reasoning, or at least coming up with the bullshit. Yeah. Like, you know, at least they address like the topic of what they're changing, whether they use PR talk. So I'd at least like to know from Valve. Like, by the way, even on something as simple as this, if Valve just set themselves said like, yeah, actually, our bad. Actually, we didn't design that well. We didn't think it through. That'd go somewhere. I'd have some goodwill from that, you know. So I agree, though. There has to be some community liaison, because at the moment, like, here's the analogy. Valve just feels like some bizarre Old Testament God where we're just like fucking in the wilderness, like, I beseech you, Lord, what do I have to do? Please, just speak to me. Send me a sign. I don't have anything. And he's like, no, I will remain hostile from you and stoic, mankind. So we just need a sign that you actually care, God, aka Valve, aka Gabe Newell.
I'm sure from Valve's perspective, in a way, it's like if they take this the like open market stance of there's going to be lots of tournament organizers out there, and that they're going to be, you know, we're going to give the tournaments to the most capable people. We set out these are our rules. This is the supplemental rule book. You're supposed to follow this, and they give you it, and they just want to wash their hands of it. And it's like, well, look, you've ran a really good series of events for over a number of years. Like, here, we're going to award you with the major and go and take it. So I don't know what it means in terms of relationship for them, because it just came in such a bad way, and that the perception was that it's favoring the better teams so that they get a better event. It's nonsense, really. But from Big's perspective, because the capsule that you end up in the major has a big impact.
For sure.
That you'll generate.
Yeah.
So I'm sure in offices in Big's offices that they would have been delighted.
It could be a swing of millions. Yeah, for sure.
So it's a big deal, and then to have that kind of to hear that that's not the case is going to be pretty disappointing.
Okay, my bad point is actually one that's an obvious one to me, but a lot of people missed it, which is, it's not just because of Astralis, but it certainly helps. Holy fuck, is Danish CS in a bad position right now? Like, you can have individual players. We just talked about blameF's pretty good. You know what? Tessus and Shush have sort of rediscovered themselves in Heroic, haven't they, with that international lineup? You've got fucking Carrigan, I guess, still in phase. But, mate, you look at who isn't there. It's insane. Remember, if you will go and look, the past 2 years, we had Heroic used to be a really good all-Danish team, like contender for events. Astralis was always solid. They were at least, hovering around the top 10, or even if they weren't top 10, you knew they were, better than that because they had people like Device and blameF who could win you real games, etc. Then you go and look, even this year, Astralis was solid, a bunch of it, they were good. You go and look, there's no Astralis, they're completely gone. Obviously, the guys in Falcons, Sonic, Magus, that's all a waste of time. Snappy, who even knows where his career is at, by the way. By the way, I'll just throw this out there. All the stuff I was saying on these shows was accurate. He was absolutely told he had loads of time and they were going to build around him and they wouldn't overreact to these pieces. I can tell you, I'll just say from based on what I know, he has been fucked over by Falcons. They've just decided now, the PR anglers, you just cut them all, don't you? So there are so many big names, and the reason why it's so great, Cadian had the whole Liquid and now he's in Astralis. The reason it's so crazy to me is because if there was one scene that on paper always should have been able to keep all one nationality lineups, it is the Danish scene. If you even made a list of some of the names I just listed off, you could make a good team out of that. You could make a top 10 team. You could make better teams than they currently have. So to me, I know in general, most people are fine with the game becoming like Dota, where it's League, where everything's just an international roster and you don't even think of teams as associated with certain countries. But especially for Counter-Strike, the reason why I worry specifically about this one, though, is because what Danish CS has always hung its hat on is tactical play. And unfortunately, that's the one thing I don't like about CS2. CS2 does feel way more to me like it was designed by fucking Yakindar or something. It's just some fucking entry fragger's dream. It's just people wide swinging with ridiculous Ferrari peaks and shooting. But it's not any more than what's happened to the game I love, basically, Mauisnake. Get fucking Doc Rivers in here. What has happened to the game I love? What happened to all that brilliant fucking, tactical build-up, Danish people going I don't even know stuff in Danish. So you imagine I know pulser, that just means sausage, but whatever. In this case, sausage means that, hit them hard at the banana at the right time and whatever. So anyway, what happened to that? Where did that go, eh? What happened to that brilliant shit? That used to be, people know it was my favourite drug, wasn't it? Danish CS, hell of a drug. Problem is now, it's fucking Crocodile or something. Who's even on it still, except just some fucking degenerate homeless fuck who's probably going to be dead soon. But enough about Falcons. Whatever. Anyway, what do you guys think about that? Ross, what do you think about Danish CS being dead, mate, or life support anyway?
Yeah, you can start with Danish CS, but they at a point, Denmark, I think on face that they had, in terms of their overall player base, the largest kind of per capita in a way.
Oh, wow, right.
Volume of their players, percentage of their players were level 10 on Faceit, so whatever they were doing was they were producing really high quality players, and that's obviously translated into the richest period of Danish CS ever, but that's faltering, and it's not just Danish CS, it's Western European Counter-Strike. I deal with this stuff all the time. I don't understand to some extent, I don't understand what's happening. We used to have so much. If you were to think, if not for ZywOo and Israeli CS, Western CS would be in a really tough spot. ZywOo kind of saved French Counter-Strike, where they were on the verge of getting relegated from MDL, and he came around and kind of revitalized that. And then we have Israeli players in kind of all around the place, propping up teams. I think it's, we've seen like how many young interesting AWPers we've seen come from CS. It's like the list is as long as my arm.
It's crazy.
I cannot name one to you in Western Europe.
Yep. True.
That is so worrying. And even the teams that like ours and other teams that have qualified through Western CS, for the most part, they're built of players with over 1,000 games on HLTV. Like the French players is probably the most French players we've seen in a major in ages, but they're all guys who are absolute stalwarts of Counter-Strike.
So to you, like the growing regions are like CIS, or it's places like, fucking Latvia and all these Hungary and all these places like that, fucking Czech Republic. That's where like the talent's coming from now.
Yeah, even like the Eklock guys, Sinners
sure.
guys.
Yeah. There's a lot of Czech players at this RMR, wasn't it? It was crazy, yeah.
And even like there's IC, Can is at this. Like there are more up and coming AWPers from Kazakhstan than there are from all of Western Europe. So can't figure it out yet. I don't think it's just purely in Counter-Strike, but there's something's going horribly wrong for Western European Counter-Strike. But Denmark was like the jewel in the crown of European CS. It was just, you could put together 3 or 4 really interesting teams,
for sure.
And they would, whether they're doing it well in tier 2, and then they're also a threat at the RMR. And now it's, and you mentioned Astralis, and I have like respect in some ways that it's like they've all in on CS, and that's their title, and they want to be Danish CS, and they want to be the team and put together the best players, and that's just been it's been disastrous. So it's like I still think Danish CS is so important, so strong, and our best player is a Dane. But if you're trying to tell me who like years ago, you could say there'd be lists and lists of great players from Denmark
for sure
that were up and coming and exciting, and now the most exciting player from Scandinavia is probably Nilo, and although he is really interesting, he wouldn't have been the top 5.
It's not a device or something like that, you config or something. Yeah, true.
So times are changing. CS is just moving more east, I think, in terms of how dominant it is.
Speaking of which, if I just say his name, I just realised config exists still. He's also not around, so
yeah,
he's still alive, technically. Yeah.
I just think that the dispersion of the in-game leaders from Denmark has probably shot this scene in the foot in a weird way, just because it's almost like they were suffering from their own success, actually. Because people like Kerrigan and Snappy, and even in a way Hooksy, did so much with pieces from their own region, then they were recruited to other rosters, Kerrigan to FaZe, Hooksy to G2, Snappy to now Falcons, and they're not really continuing that lineage that made them such a powerful force before. I do think that there is in a way, this probably sucks for a lot of people to hear this, but I feel like the Danish scene is kind of rebooting in a way, and partially due to probably Hunden's efforts with Sashi. I actually felt like they played really good CS. Say what you will about the guy, and I find him, I don't really like him myself, but I feel like it's pretty
well, you're like, I denounce Hunden and his behaviour regarding the bug, but I do think he's allowed to make teams, and they can be good at CS. Okay, that's the official statement from Mauisnake. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's just,
right,
but what's interesting is that actually this has gotten to the point to emphasize your point. There's 6 people from Sweden that actually qualified to this major. There's only 5 that qualified from Denmark, and for the last 3, 4, 5 years, maybe even longer, I feel like the weird plotline switch in World Counter-Strike was just that, wow, Denmark overtook Sweden, and now Sweden is actually lightly back on top. Admittedly, 2 of those Swedish players went through the Americas RMR with wildcard, but they still did make it. But I think that I just think that it's a lineage problem, probably, and the fact that they lost so many of the in-game leaders and that's why I feel like it's really like I don't. If I'm Hooksy, I would have loved an opportunity to be the in-game leader of a Sashi-like team. I think that he should be looking at trying to get onto one of these Danish lineups and practically recreate a Copenhagen Flames 2.0. Like, for example, one of the Danish in-game leaders that was also at the RMRs was Valde. Like, why wouldn't Hooksy be able to join TSM and just make them better tomorrow? Because, like, I'm sorry. I know that we all have these ideas of Valde in our head about how good he was as an individual player 4 years ago. He's not that player anymore. And 2, he's not a good enough caller to merit even the rating that he's putting up on these kinds of teams. So I would love to see Hooksy on TSM at this point. I think they would be better, and maybe even just make Valde a player. Who knows? But yeah, I think that there's room for some of these Danish IGLs to come back. Because Snappy also is benched, by the way, on Falcons now. Like I don't know why he couldn't come back and do something in that space too. So I think that it's a downturn for them, but I don't necessarily think that it's a foreboding future necessarily.
No, I think that there's like it's hard. I think it's going to be hard for. I have this conversation with Karen a lot about Swedish CS and why that has gone to where it's at. I think a big part of it was like why were these nations dominant early on? It was because they had access to broadband. They're wealthy countries, they had access to broadband and computers, and now it's become kind of more egalitarian, and people can afford these things. And you have people in the farthest reaches of Russia who are just have the grind and the effort that they're putting in to come and take everyone's jobs in Western European Counter-Strike it's ferocious, the amount of practice that they put in. So I think that we, in all of our esports in Western Europe, need kind of to take some learnings, I think, from other parts of the world who are quickly like taking over, I would say, and then also regions that have always been so dominant, like Korea, who have always had this level of work ethic and just absolutely dominated us on the international scene. So I think that it's not just isolated with Denmark. They still have loads of great players, but it's all of Scandinavia and all of Western Europe it needs to wake up to a reality that there's a new dawn and it's coming from the east.
Okay, right, let's move to the last section then, which is obviously going to be the ugly point. So Ross, what is your ugly point?
Yeah, we kind of touched on Astralis, and I never like, piling on other teams because, we have a lot of our own issues at Fnatic. But I think Astralis and Falcons, you have to look at, they've missed the last two majors in Counter-Strike, and they've probably had the most significant investment profile or kind of footprint of all the teams. I think Astralis sold their League of Legends LEC spot and went out and acquired the duo from Heroic to build a super team, which was not too super. And then you had the Falcons guys who have went out and invested record sums in Counter-Strike and esports in general, and it's been really disastrous. And I think that from a seller's perspective, it's like they injected a lot of like money into the scene in terms of when they acquired those players, it like as in they completely tore apart the ENCE roster without taking probably the most important piece in Nerds. But it injected a lot of money into the scene, and kind of all teams had to rebuild. And there was, I think, it kind of in ways buoyed the transfer market that was actually quite stagnant.
Yes.
Like out of nowhere, we kind of saw really significant transfer fees off the back of Astralis' LEC spot sale and Falcons entering the scene. And then neither of those teams were able to materialize that into anything meaningful. And there hasn't even been glimpses of things that are that would excite fans. Where like the concept, I'm not really like I don't enjoy, like I wouldn't really like enjoy working in an environment where you have kind of a never-ending budget to go out and build rosters. But there is an element of pressure that comes with that, but also you're almost laissez-faire in terms of like, going to go out and we're going to build a super team and invest whatever and not really be that thoughtful about it. And it's kind of, I think Falcons have just expanded so much over such a short period of time when it comes to the amount of rosters that they're managing as well. So that has to play a part of it. I assume that they've kind of given the keys to the staff around the players to kind of look after things. And I think it's been really, even the simple addition, all that kind of stuff, it just feels really off. I think that they're probably internally super disappointed with how the last year has gone, but I don't know, are they going to come back in the start of next year and trying to, most likely Falcons they will probably come back and build another super team. I don't know what the next kind of step is for Astralis, but I think that their last year has been for the level of investment that they've made into Counter-Strike. I think it's been nothing shy of disastrous. Yeah.
What do you think, Maui?
Well, yeah, Falcons and Astralis failing to make it, two of the heaviest hitters in the space in terms of brand expenditure. That's obviously kind of. I actually have, I don't know. My angles on this are just that I don't think you should just be simply rewarded for roster construction purely based on the numbers, but it should be. And I guess it's. I guess what's annoying about this is that, Astralis didn't make it, and I would love to just also say bad things about them because of how the organization has been. But in terms of the actual players, like I don't dislike actually any of the players really on Astralis right now. Sure, Cadian and the Astralis guys with the Hunden saga sort of turned into villains for a while, and like the Stabby arc was an interesting one, but I don't really dislike them that much actually, but it's just kind of unfortunate that Device couldn't play. I think they qualify if Device plays pretty easily actually. So that's just that's bad timing. That's bad timing for Device to pull out right then and for him to kind of sack their major. And that's kind of the reality we live in, that if one player cites mental health issues or physical health issues, regardless, that it can kind of just change the course of your entire organization so easily. It's not like you're a 7-man, 6-man roster that can easily sub one guy in for one guy out. And for Falcons, I just think they just held on way too long to a team that wasn't working. For a team that's supposed to have as much money as they do, and they do have that much money, I don't understand why they didn't do anything quicker. I just feel like that to me is where I was really confused. Like Modern wasn't really working out for me. Dupree was he was like a solid player. He wasn't a great player. I feel like and Snappy, despite how good he was as an in-game leader in CS:GO, he was pretty detrimental to this team too. I also feel like the cohesion just never really came about. I feel like they needed more drastic changes quicker. So I actually feel like at one point you could have argued that the people that should have stayed on Falcons should have been Sun, Pius, and Magisk, and you could replace all the other three. But they ended up just kind of doing a Sun, Pius for Simple, which is cool on paper, but it just feels like it's just not really run with any the ideas behind a lot of what they were doing just felt off base for me throughout most of what they were throughout their entire 2024 really. So
Sorry, I think that you like the point you made about Astralis. I agree. I think that they've suffered more, and I have a lot of respect for the idea of like wanting to be the team in Denmark and take that mantle of be like, we're going to build the Danish team. We're going to send our team around Denmark and make, be famous within Denmark and own and be a Counter-Strike team, because I think that like a lot of the times you get distracted by being multi-organizational, like multi-teams, where like ENCE and Maus, where they're really focused on Counter-Strike. You can see it. You can really see it's evident in their approach. And Astralis tried to do that, and through, very aggressive ways of picking apart Heroic and doing everything they can to like take their staff, take their players, take everything to be that team in Denmark and be the thing that, because if you want to maintain, and there's a thing probably Sweden has lacked, if you want to maintain a player base that is really competitive, you have to have an inspirational team that people want to play for. And Astralis are like thriving to be that, but it's killer when you're going up, making every effort in terms of investment, and then major after major after major is failed qualifications. It must feel brutal internally, but also there must be so much pressure on the staff behind the scenes, because you can't have that level of investment and be one of the teams making serious acquisitions. Because when you make those acquisitions of players, you're essentially writing the check that yes, we're going to qualify for the major. That's it.
Yeah,
sure.
You can't go to your CFO and say, yeah, we want to go and buy these two superstars. We want to bring back Device. We want to have blameF. We're a lock. We're going to be one of the best teams in the world.
Yeah.
We're going to go for another legacy. So you have to answer those, from a financial perspective, you have to answer those questions to your board. And I'm sure it's a very tough pill to swallow. And the timing of the Device thing is so brutal. It's kind of like just it's the last kind of dagger, I think, in how they've been run.
Yeah, I agree with this actual framing that this is ugly rather than just bad. Because, for example, you could go in theory 2 years from now and maybe actually these projects invest millions again and it goes right and they're awesome and they're some of the best teams in the world. Like, the reason it should definitely be an ugly point is because it is a really fucking bad sort of canary in the coal mine moment for where the transfer market is at in Counter-Strike, that these two teams can throw this many millions and actually in the end, yes, obviously the Device thing's like a little bit of an asterisk for this, but in the end, they weren't even particularly getting close to qualify for the major. Like, they actually both played kind of whack and uninspired CS and have just actually, like, limped to not even getting over the finish line. They've just limped to be, I don't know, shot with the shotgun right at the finish line because you may as well just get rid of these lineups. So that is a really bad sign for the scene, especially because, in theory, there's supposed to be two different approaches. Falcons is supposed to be the way Real Madrid, we just sign all the best players. Well, you obviously mega fucked that up. Like, I'll go into specifics on that. And then Astralis is trying to be like, we're just a Danish super team. By the way, as I pointed out in my point on the bad point, there is still Danish talent. You just haven't got them all together. So if you do it right, you almost certainly could have a 5-man Danish lineup that's like, I don't know, potentially the best team in the world, or at least like top 5. Let's say top 5 to be generous now and not go too crazy on it. So to me, you've mismanaged both squads from different ends. And also, yeah, it's not just this major now, you failed many majors. That's one of the reasons why I have to keep pointing out to fans when they do that sort of like, they pretend like they're playing, you know, championship manager and who would I remove from the squad. I always have to tell them when it's like an Astralis or a Liquid, like, bro, you can't just like not make majors or have super teams worth millions and then just go, I don't like this super team, rebuild, re-roll, I'm just going to start over again. It's like the millions don't just suddenly reappear back in your pocket to spend again. Like, that you've spent the budget. Like, it's why actually one of the real dirty secrets of Counter-Strike for the last 4 years has basically been how certain orgs have had to like paper over the mistakes of super teams with fucking academy players that they almost certainly did not want to put into those rosters. But I'll tell you the dirty secret, guys, they did it because that guy made 3k a month, whereas the guy they had to fire made 30k a month, and they have to make up that budget aspect. Yeah. And spoiler, this isn't the old days where you go, hey, you suck, 30k a month guy, see you dickhead, don't let the door hit you on the way out. On the way out he goes, and I'm bench, oh cool, I'll have 15k a month of that every month, while the guy getting the 3k plays, tanks the whole game because he might not even be a fucking support player, and then every fan goes, kill yourself, essentially, like, because that just sadly is the nature of the internet. So I also feel like it's also, it has so many knock-on effects when you fuck these projects up. So to bring it back to these specific two teams, though, I also do think the device one, here's the problem I have with this, Ross, is on the one hand, yeah, it's really unlucky. You can't have like your iconic player, one of your players with the best floor ever, be the guy who like can't play at the major qualifier. That probably does doom your team immediately. But I'll also just put this out there. When you consider, I've known this guy a long time. I've heard during some of the best years of Astralis, his like health issues were their absolute worst, and he was at times where he was in like real serious pain during matches. And look, I'm not going to speculate how bad or good it is now, but I'll just say this: I think you are way more likely to do a move like this. Like, sorry guys, I'm just going to have to take time out when the team is in disarray like they are at the moment, and they're having a lot of things go badly for them, and they're not a team where everything's awesome. I think that's the sort of thing where, especially when you're at the point in his career Device is at, you listen, you can go through anything if what's at the end is worth it, but if it doesn't look like you can get where you want to go, maybe you say, I have to take a step back, or I have to wait till you re-figure out this roster, or I don't know, maybe I need actual months off, maybe all the strain of all the shit this year's got to you. So that one's tragic. And then the Falcons one, I'm just going to put this out there, even though I can't say you can look at, I think the only player the whole time, the only two players were some Pius and Megas who were like, not blameless, but like they always could have been recovered. Like I always said to people, I could tell he was never watching some Pius. He was good. It's just the AWPers aren't as in, like, it's a reason why the reason people think MonteCristo is the best player in the world, guys, is actually because he AWPs all the time and he looks at the best player. Aside from that, most people use the rifle half the time now anyway. So players like some Pius are literally the player that got devalued the most, even though he didn't do anything. He just woke up one day in CS2 instead of CSGO. Like the game just changed. And so if you consider, if you could go back in time now, no one could know this at the time, but in hindsight, Falcons did almost do exactly the wrong move the entire time. So first of all, they built a squad which would have been completed by having Nico, because the premise goes, you're actually upgrading Nerds to Nico. That sounds fucking fire on paper. That actually sounds, by the way, like we're going to win the major. And then you build the whole squad, but then you don't get Nico at the last hour. Now again, you can't know, he's literally just going to like be like an actual Hollywood movie. He's about to like put the pen on the paper, and as it's about to touch with the ink, he goes, actually, you know, maybe second thoughts, and then doesn't sign. And you're like, what happened? The whole thing? What are you doing, Nico? Like, that's, by the way, I'm joking about this, but I'm almost not joking. If that was an actual sports franchise, Nico, you know that guy just goes straight out the fucking window of the skyscraper after that. Like, he's built a whole fucking off-season like that. And you're like, yeah, maybe I'd stay with our cousin actually and play Blast group stage. Like, This is why I always say you players don't know how entitled you are. It's fucking crazy. So anyway, I tried to build a team with Nico. Then when I don't get Nico, this is how crazy bad luck it is if you're snappy. All right, I have Boros. You know what? Boros is pretty skilled. Everyone's just seen you can pilot this guy a little bit. I can't go into why, but I'll always tell people this. If you knew the reason why they kicked him from that team and the other stories people in the scene heard, none of you would ever question that move. In fact, you'd even go, I'm sorry, you're not actually simple, so I can't keep you in the team with the things you've done. So you even lose like your up-and-coming talent. And then in the end, your AWP is weaker. So now you just don't have a star rifler and your AWP is weaker in the game. Like, actually, it's kind of logical how bad they are. Now, look, they did, eye test-wise, also look like absolute ass. You can't excuse that. But I also think if you're someone like Snappy, it's like, bro, can I ever get a break? Like, even at the end, they go, we gave you simple. You gave me simple after like fucking 3 maps ever officially in CS2 a year after the game. Like, you give me the worst simple ever, didn't you? Like, you didn't give me a chance on that one. And then lastly, to me, the real moment you knew this lineup was doomed was the Dupree signing. Because that was the most ridiculous like example I've ever seen of like the analogy would be, they do this in football all the time too. When there's a team in trouble, you sign like a player who used to be like, pretty sweet. It's like Raheem Sterling going like fucking Arsenal now. It's like, you're not actually the old Raheem Sterling, bro. You're not going to like score 30 goals. Like, you're just here to make us believe like, no, that's an upgrade. Like, we're doing something, guys. Like, it's not enough. It's not the best player. It's not going to put you over the top. So the Dupree signing to me was a depression because I think by then, this is, we're still talking like 6 months into the game. By then, you already sort of knew that lineup wouldn't really work with that player change. It didn't even matter how well Dupree played, by the way. Even at those first like 2 months, he was pretty good. Like, it was never going to be enough. So sadly, this is almost like they unironically should put like this Falcons initial first year in a fucking museum because it's how not to make a team in CS2, unfortunately. Like, they almost did zag every time they should have zigged, if you know what I mean. Now, look, some of it was bad luck, but also it just never ever worked on any level. I even think at the end of it, the saddest thing for me is I do think actually most fans will just take everyone except maybe some Pyres because of that simple angle, but also Megas. They'll say all the rest are all trash. I think they can all be reused. Like, the actual one I would reclaim immediately, I predict he will be, is actually Madden. I think Madden will just go to another team. I think there's loads of teams want someone like that, mate, who's going to do the sorts of roles he is. So, I don't know. I think it's sad. I agree with you. It's definitely ugly. Right, Maui, you want to go to your point?
Yeah, so this is just the complete opposite of Ross's earlier point, actually. I actually think that there should be a farewell to the RMRs and the miners. They were brilliant in terms of narrative building, but I actually think that the ugly point is kind of just that the death of the RMRs is actually, to me, good. I just feel like to have a tournament, and it's kind of stemming from what I made on the point I made on Hot Take Point made like a year ago or whatever, when I said that the RMR is the most important tournament of the year.
Sure.
And I just think that the problem is that the RMR being more important than the major was not a bonus narrative builder to me. It was actually more a flaw in the system, that it does uplift these teams from practically nothing and changes their lives. But I actually appreciate continuity leading into a world championship, which should be the crowning event of the season and the calendar, not the RMR itself. And that is what the RMR became. And it was amazing to watch that unfold repeatedly and how many people's lives change. But I feel like, we talk about the fact that Falcons and Astralis invested so much money and they were in these positions where they failed. But if they just went with what happened through the rest of the calendar, they'd be at the World Championship. They'd be competing at it. And I'd rather see them fail at the major than see them fail at the RMR personally. And so I also looked at these kinds of numbers of just we have 5 of the top 20 teams that didn't make the major, and with a 24-team major, and I'm using HLTV rankings, with a 24-team major, and if I have 5 of the top 20 teams not there, I already feel like, man, we're kind of missing something already. And then the major is actually going to move to 32 teams next year for the Austin major, but it's going to have an additional stage at the beginning. And of the top 32 teams ranked on HLTV, 13 of them didn't make it. That's 40% of the world's best teams not actually at the World Championship. So for me, I would rather just see, if we're going to have a 32-team major, maybe it's not 1 through 32, but it's 1 through 36, with 3 of the teams not making it for just kind of regional reasons. Like, the very bottom European team doesn't make it, but of that group, but say like a team that maybe came from Asia gets to slide in because they're coming from a less represented region. So I'm personally, yes, yeah, I am in watching moments like Passion UA play out and the hype of some of these decider games in the past, like Cloud9 versus FaZe, for example, they were incredibly exciting, and I'm going to always remember them in the histories of Counter-Strike. But I would rather just all of these moments occur at the World Championship, because a World Championship should just be the celebration of the best teams in general, and it shouldn't be a, oh, why isn't Falcons there? Oh, because they lost in the RMR qualifier because they fucked it up. Like I'd rather I even just think it's a better narrative builder if, oh yeah, Falcons were there, they spent the most money, but they came in dead last place. We can all laugh at them
Right.
now in a way that's a little bit less detrimental to the organization's health.
Yeah, I agree that the way the RMR is now is not conducive with what actually makes sense from two perspectives. I think that what is Navi doing at an RMR trying to qualify
Sure.
for a
Yeah.
major? Like it's
Yeah.
just so redundant. It's like, you know, we're as Fnatic in a phase of trying to build something, and we should be competing against other teams who are in that phase. Like, but we play Navi, and you might play Vitality. Like those teams should be at the major. They shouldn't even have to travel to Shanghai those few weeks early to compete and stay out there potentially. It just doesn't make sense. I agree, but the problem is that we're not. The crux of why it's the incentives are misaligned. It's that we have and it's the nature of having digital revenues as being one of the biggest factors of the game, and it's so binary. It's you attend a major, you get the revenues. In some ways you get the same revenues as the teams that win the major,
Yeah.
or welcome second or whatever, because you get your own capsule if you win. But and that's where the problem is. So I like the idea of, let's send the whatever, maybe as Thorin said, send the top 12 teams to the major that, you know, they've earned that spot, or top 16. But the team who is ranked 32nd and the team who is ranked 33rd, the efficacy of that, like any ranking system, to tell me that team should be at
That's
the major
true.
versus the team who's 33rd is mental. Like, so it should, I don't think that
I
we
can
should,
agree with that. Yeah, I can agree with
I
that,
don't think we
actually.
should, like, I think that now we're going too far on the other side of the direction. So what we had initially is boiled and made no sense, and now we're going to something where you're going to see, like, that moment for that team that qualifies to major as being ranked 32 or whatever, or in Europe say it's 24th. Like that, their celebration is waiting for the ranking update, where it should be, let's send those guys and let's make them compete and earn that spot. But in a ideally fewer BO1s, and even if it's done online or whatever it may be, those teams are very established, so you can play it online and not have the same kind of concerns around you know, sporting integrity, or get them to go to like Serbia or do boot camps together, just so that we feel like the teams that are on the margin, that are kind of, especially, you know, we wouldn't have teams that, you know, if you're a tier 1 team and you go and you essentially rip away the core of a roster, and they have to go through a whole like year of rebuilding it or whatever, and they cannot get back to them, you know, at that moment in time it's almost impossible for them to accrue enough points to get back to a major. That is so tough for them as a business, after them spending a lot of time building that roster. So I would prefer to have the compromise of, let's have some form of an OR, but let's send the teams that it's almost a nonsense having them there at the OR. But like, for the likes of us in this moment, and for anyone like the Passion UA guys or wherever, the guys who are on the margin of, like, they are highly competitive, and if you were to play each other 100 times, it would be nice to, you know, there probably wouldn't be a huge disparity between the two teams. Let's figure out who those, like, let's just keep those moments of that pressure and the adulation of, wow, we actually made it to a major and we had to have some form of a match to decide that. I think that those are still valuable. But yeah, I agree that what we have had is not ideal, but what we're going to, I think, is the same. I don't think it's giving us, I don't think it's having those celebratory moments of, you've now gotten your, you know, you've been immortalized in the game by having your signature in the game. I think that getting that for the first time by just scraping into the rankings, I don't think is exciting either.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
just say, oh, go on, Murray.
Well, I mean, I actually love that idea. I think it should be a hybrid, kind of like what TI is, where TI has its invite system, but then it has its regional qualifiers based on the points that they got. I think that's a great way to find a middle ground here, because I just feel like I would say top 15 team. If it's a 32 team major, I probably just want the 16 best teams of the season to be there no matter what, and then teams 17 through 48, or if that number makes sense, then I want those teams to be the ones that are fighting out for those last half spots.
Basically, obviously, this is a point we've discussed many times on this show because we were the ones who sort of almost like formalized the idea that like it's true. If you looked at the current setup, actually just qualifying to the major from the RMR is technically more important than winning the major itself, because one, you have to do that to get to win the major, and then also secondly, like the money, like you don't actually get as much potentially from winning the major as you get from getting into the right capsule, as we just said. So I do think the problem I have is that just misaligns the incentives of the scene. I mean, an obvious angle, I'll tie it to even what Ross said, which is I also hated the angle that like, look, I want the teams that aren't proven to have to potentially show it and get through the qualifier. I don't want, as he says, the Navis and the Vitalities. In fact, essentially, when you enter them into a qualifier, all you're doing is you're making a scenario where if they qualify, cool, no harm, no foul. But if they don't qualify, you've now potentially ruined the major for everyone. Like, including, by the way, the teams that get in there. If I'm a little team, like, it would have meant a lot more for GamerLegion to win that major over Vitality, over if they'd have just played like Apex in the final. You know what I mean? So I do think it's big to have the right teams there. So I think you can find a hybrid between the two. Because I did hate that idea. It's not just that like it was true. It was more important to get the millions for your org than win the major. Like that can't be something we have. But also because you don't even get any direct qualification unless you go through the RMR, it essentially just devalues stuff like Katowice and Cologne. Like imagine a world where Vitality won Cologne and looked awesome, and then they didn't even qualify to this major. Like what are we doing at that point in time? At that point, suddenly now winning Cologne's not that big a deal because that's not the same as even making through an RMR. So to me, again, you've misaligned the incentives. Like I want those events to be, I mean, this is why if they're part of what qualify, it will be part of the system. That's also why you want to win Cologne, because it'll also pretty much guarantee you're one of the people that'll be in the ranking to get the next major spot, assuming we space these things out correctly and give them the right amount of Valve points and all that jazz. So I think it just makes the scene sort of make sense. Like everyone will know where they're at and they know what they're competing for, because you always have to ask yourself in every system, in my opinion, what are the incentives? Because people absolutely will align themselves to the incentives and away from the disincentives, etc. So yes. Right, the last point of the show, and I have actually, even though we've done a lot of big, like, abstract format top, this is just going to be a team-based one. And I've had to put it in ugly specifically, because actually, you know what, in that meme, I don't actually think this team is bad. I'm just going to put as ugly Eternal Fire. Because holy fuck, these guys, it's funny, because at the exact same time Mouse got shit and these guys had their run, then Mouse got really bad for that month and a half, and Eternal Fire like swapped parts with them and became like a fucking top tip. And then they reversed, and now Mouse is back again, and Eternal Fire's shit again. Because, bro, when they had those two finals in a row where they made the Bet Boom final, that was the one where at that event they had to beat Mouse on land to get there. Then they made it at the EPL one where they beat like Vitality on fucking LAN. And then, by the way, I'll tell you right now, they almost got Na'Vi in that final. They were so fucking close. You could even argue they were like closer to win that final in some of the maps than Na'Vi was. Like they had Na'Vi right on the ropes, almost beat them. So you look at that point in time, look at some of the scalps you've beaten. Guys, nobody beats people like Mouse and fucking Vitality on LAN if they're like a lesser team. Those are names that are out of the stratosphere. The idea you could, by the way, almost win a best of 5 against Na'Vi is insane. So, one, their form was insane right before this point where they just slammed into the ground and they can't even now make like playoffs of a fucking ESL Challenger event. Like, and they're just bombing the RMR. And even worse, they're bombing the RMR against nobodies. They're not even getting the really insane draw where they play on top tier. The reason why this is insane to me is there are so many analytical factors I can give you as to why this team should be good. Like, one, not only was their form excellent, and by the way, this team I think is one of the best examples of a team that shows how you play CS2. They play that like more up-tempo, like smash mouth T-side. It works. That works against the best teams. Secondly, I used to make fun of them because all they used to have was that Vertigo. Now, they have Vertigo and Anubis, guys. That means they can always have an angle in a veto where they can get something and have some upset potential. Very few teams in the world good at both those maps. Then we'll just throw out there, they've got a player I think is completely overqualified to be in their team, Xantares. Xantares is like a leash. This guy, in theory, should be able to walk into almost any top 10 team right now and go, can I have that spot? And it would be an upgrade. This guy's fucking amazing. And then lastly, I mean, I sort of said it there, but like, I think the style of play actually is quite conducive to how you play CS2. Like, I think it should work. So to me, it's almost a mystery that they're this bad, actually. I'd love to meme on them more, but like, I actually think they should be way better than this. Like, I was very, very underwhelmed with this failure at this qualifier. Like, look, I do think they maybe were slightly over-performing when they made the finals, etc., and almost beat Na'Vi. But it showed to me, like, you know, what they were capable of. And as I say, I don't think there's many bad teams that could do any of the shit they just did before. So they can't inherently be a bad team for me. So what do you guys think, Eternal Fire?
Oh, I think that it's another example of I think it's possible but I think it's possible when you have that rifler who's so impactful and has so much multi-kill in him, so much ADR that he can elevate nearly any team. I think if you take I rate Xantares as being, and there's like so many of these people in sports who are like, I don't know, it's the best player to never win a major in golf or whatever it may be.
Right.
I think that Xantares is that guy. I think he's outrageously good. I've always loved him as a player, and I think that it's so impressive how he was able to elevate that team. I think if you take him out of the team, that they become non-competitive almost immediately. I've always wanted to sign him at teams. I think he's amazing. But and it's one of those things. It's just that he's had such an unfortunate, I think, run of his career. But I think that I always think that they're just punching above their weight. And even the last kind of 6 months or so, Xantares has been amazing. And it's just kind of, he needs a bit more assistance from his teammates. But I think the addition they finally got Wicadia, who like another FPL superstar, that was enough then to kind of give them that extra bit. But he's always just been, I've always seen him as been one of the most undervalued players in CS,
right?
Without question. I think it's been disappointing for them for sure. I think to Maui's point, I think that you would want them at the major. I think they can be like a bogey team for like they're not really a contender to win it, obviously, but they're someone who you don't like playing against them. Nobody likes playing against Xantares. It's it can be, especially on that vertical ramp, he can be a nightmare. He's walking up there.
Well, for Eternal Fire, I mean, for them to not make it just feels like a shame because they had a really sick year. And the storyline for them that actually concerns me the most is how much is this going to actually hurt Xantares' top 20 positioning. Right. I always just kind of think of like, okay, summing up their year, what's that gonna be? Because I had him in the top 10 of my players. And now without even playing the second major of the year, another chance to rack up some numbers. Like the thing is, he hasn't played a lot of big events, like, or the number of maps he's played at these isn't very high. And I feel like it's gonna be one of those cases where people see the ranking and they're just gonna unfortunately conflate his team success or lack thereof with his own individual ability. Because for my money, top 8 safely. I'd say top 8 safely players at CS2, but I feel like there's a good chance that HLTV might exclude him from the top 10. So that's where I feel like we need to actually always be here to just describe, or like to make sure that there is some sort of formal record of how good we perceive these players to be, because when it's etched in internet stone in the HLTV top 20 and people see him outside that, they're gonna be like, oh yeah, no, he had a good year, but it wasn't really fantastic. It's like, but that's not actually his fault. It's actually not his fault at all. Like, sure, he could have played better in the Astralis series that got him eliminated, but he is he's one of the best 8 players, period. And if I said Rifler's top 5, like, he's a top 5 Rifler in CS2. I think that sounds more impressive. And for him to be out of it, it's just like, what are we doing here? Like when we have all these records and everything like that, are we really gonna say because Eternal Fire didn't live up to his expectations or his standard that we're now punishing him for that? That's where we need to just make sure we exercise a bit more judgment on these kinds of lists.
No, by the way, I think the point you make there is a very valid one, which is it's a bit like the Ballon d'Or in football. The problem is your team also has to do very well, otherwise you just don't get to win it. So, like, if a fan looked back in history and they're like, wow, this guy was better than this guy, not necessarily. Like, sometimes you're like splitting hairs when you come to like who's in the top 3 or whatever. What are you going to say, Ross?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is, and where do you find the sweet spot? And this is always the age-old argument. It's like between winning trophies and individual achievements, and what's the nice balance that's acceptable. But I think that if you were to look at where Xantares' teammates would be without him in that team, or where they were prior to them playing with him again, I think it's clear. It's the same thing when Desai won French CS. It's like he revitalized the whole scene, and he extended players' careers, and he gave them trophy moments. That is. Like, that's the definition of greatness, is being able to elevate those around you to a status that they wouldn't otherwise be able to achieve. And he's one of the best examples of that ever in CS, I think, Xantares. And he's just been on the periphery of everything. And I think if he doesn't get the accolades that he deserves, it's never a title that people want in sport, to be the best player to never. Yes,
he's on some like Harry Kane shit or something. Anyway, it's like it's great that you're brilliant, but you'd rather have the trophy, obviously. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, for sure.